Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last of our 2020 Cley Calling events. Not at Cley, but reaching you in your homes all across the world. Welcome to people joining us in Norfolk. Welcome to people joining us across the UK and indeed right around the globe. We're delighted this evening to welcome Matt Gaw as our guest to talk about his utterly beautiful. Now, I know you think I say this every time, but Matt's book is lyrical and beautiful and charming and delightful. It is Under the Stars. And this evening I'll be talking to Matt. Good evening, Matt. How are you?
Good evening. Yeah, really good. Good to be here, although obviously we wish we were somewhere else at the moment.
You'll just have to write another book and we'll invite you back for that one. And we'll
Sounds like a good plan.
Event at Cley. Now, before we start the interesting bit, which is talking to Matt, I have a few things that I have to say. This is, of course, a free event, and we are delighted to have so many of you with us. We are extremely privileged that we've had funding up till now from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, in particular to reach audiences that we might not reach otherwise, because when our events are physically at Cley, they tend to attract people who live here in Norfolk or people who happen to be visiting. However, with this format, we can reach much further afield. And the National Lottery Heritage Fund are always really keen to hear, as indeed we're really keen to hear, if you're joining us from around the world, or if it's the kind of event that you wouldn't normally have come to. So please do let us know. We're also very grateful to North Norfolk District Council, who will be funding all the events that we've got coming lined up in the first part of 2021. More on them in a moment. Now, as I say, this is a free event, but as you well know, this has been a really tough year for organisations everywhere. And for Norfolk Wildlife Trust, obviously, we've been running reserves right across our 60 nature reserves across the county on reduced staff and, of course, reduced income. So should you wish to make a donation of, say, £5, we would be absolutely delighted and very grateful. And there is a link so to do in the emails that you've received about this event, but also in the chat. So please, should you be moved to make a donation, please, you can find the link there. You can also purchase Matt's book, which is Under the Stars. Once again, this lovely, lovely book via a link that's been posted in the chat and also in the email that you've received. And that will take you to the website of our friends and colleagues at Wild Sounds and Books. And they are very kindly offering a discount of £1 on the price of the book. And indeed, Matt's other book. I'm going to come on to this later on, but Matt's first book was The Pull of the River, which is also a very, very beautiful book. I'm picking you up a lot here, Matt.
Yeah, I'm liking it. I could just sit here and take it all day.
That's right. Well, you're going to do some work in a minute, but for now I still have to do the boring bit. Please go through the link to the Wild Sounds Books website, where you can have a discount of £1 on the sale of the book, and 10% of the sale will very generously be donated by Wild Sounds and Books to Norfolk Wildlife Trust to help us run our reserves and also help us with our appeal, because at the moment we're appealing for funding to purchase a big new area of land around our amazing Thompson Common Reserve. So if there's anybody out there with millions who feels like helping at Christmas time, on our website, norfolkwildlifetrust.org.uk, you can find information about our appeal. Talking of websites, we have a special website for these events, which is cleycalling.com. And there you can find out about all of our events. We have next one is a very exciting one. We're very honoured that Megan McCubbin and Chris Packham are joining us on the 14th of January, and bookings are already open for that event. And they've just brought out a book which is about reconnecting with the wild and what we as individual people can do in order to help fight for nature, fight for our wild landscape, but also benefit ourselves from so doing. So we're very much looking forward to talking to them both on the 14th of January. Right, that's my housekeeping done for the time being. Matt, you're going to kick off by reading to us, I believe, from Under the Stars.
I'm just going to put my specs on to look authorly and, to help me read as well. So bear me a second.
You definitely look authorly. Definitely.
Thank you very much. There's a bit of a glare off the old computer screen. I should thank you as well, Nick, for that really lovely introduction. I almost blushed. Okay, so this is the introduction from Under the Stars. The snow clouds mean there is no visible sunset tonight. The sky does not burn and bruise. The hot yolk of the sun does not split and run across the horizon in gold, yellow, and peach. The cold, white sky does not even blush. Instead, the light thickens and clots as darkness begins to form. It seeps and smokes from between strands of pines planted an arm's length apart. It rises from the shadows of my footsteps on the track and wells up from the deep frozen ruts made by 4x4s and forestry machinery that trundle through this plantation. For more than an hour now, I have tramped through the forest that grows a few miles from my home. Its familiar ruler-straight rides, sparkling with fresh spring snow that still falls in fat bumblebee flakes. The trees drooping, smored and smothered. Now the world is about to transform again. Night is coming. Darkness will soon cover the forest as surely as any snow. I can't remember the last time I was out at night. Not just out camping, running or toddling home from pubs, but really out, walking and watching as the light fades, experiencing darkness creeping up with each passing minute, from mountain to meadow. It was my 10-year-old son who had inspired this impromptu outing. The other day, as he argued for a later bedtime, he told me solemnly that the average human will spend 26 years of life asleep. Although he was still ushered complaining to his room, his words wormed their way into my brain. They made me realise that my experience of night was one of eyes moving sightlessly against lowered lids, rather than a view of the changing shades of the nocturnal hours. Although he might not have meant it as such, it was also a rebuke, a reminder that for all of my life's apparent fullness, it was in fact being only half-lived. And so here I am, venturing into the darkness.
Lovely. Bumblebee flakes of snow. What a gorgeous, gorgeous image. And both of your books are full of gorgeous imagery. So just to summarise, you then launch yourself into an exploration of the night. And first you flirt with the moon, and then you flirt with the stars, and then you do some fairly wild and rugged things, losing yourself in forests by night and so on. And then you get onto some more serious, some darker issues in a sense. Now, to me, the book follows our relationship with nature through time. So and I'm going to dwell a little bit in my questioning on three main themes. I think as human beings, in modern humanity, our relationship with nature, both physical nature around us, the world that we live in, biodiversity, the landscape, but also the stars, has gone through a period of fear and mystery and darkness and spirits, where we used allegory to explain, but we were fearful of nature. Nature was a bad thing. And you touch on that quite a lot in the book. And then we move with the Enlightenment and increasingly with the Industrial Revolution, we move into dominion over nature. And that's another very strong theme. And really, it's the first time I've ever had this idea of, oh, wow, dominion over the sky and how much we affect it, and therefore it affects biodiversity back. And we'll certainly get onto that. And then finally, a reaching for nature, and this is obviously very, very current in this year, a reaching for nature as a salve, as a way of curing ourselves. And I think, although not necessarily chronologically, that's really the themes that you touch on. So if you don't mind, I'll start with fear. Now, some of the really obvious things, of course, are things like owls and nightjars. Now, you go on an adventure finding nightjars, and you discover, of course, that they are evil portents. And if I can just read to you from around that chapter, perhaps we're determined to populate the night with monsters, real or imagined, or maybe just a little exaggerated to justify our fear of it. Tell us about an adventure on Dartmoor.
Yeah, well, I suppose I really kind of wanted to kind of to drill down into that fear. I think when I first started talking to people about going on night walks, the first response was, on your own, won't you be scared? And I don't think they kind of you know, a lot of the places that I was going, they weren't kind of thinking in terms of like street muggings or anything like that. It was very much this, it was just, I was kind of like, but scared of what? And they couldn't really put their finger on it either. It's just this really strange, slightly eerie, uncanny thing about the night, which I think probably is just due to that those changing senses. Like for me, I think probably one of the most uncanny kind of strange things about the night is when your eyes start to change and your peripheral vision increases as your rods kick in and your cones start to leave, and so you pick up a lot of these kind of movements that you wouldn't have noticed before. So I suppose that was kind of one element of it. But I wanted to go to Dartmoor because it just seemed like a really kind of spooky place. You know, it's got a lot of myths attached to it. And, you know, I think as well, when you kind of have these places, these windswept or boggy places, the ground, the soil, the earth is uneven and changing and shifting. And I think you often get these kind of these myths and ghosts and legends that kind of grow out of that.
If I can just butt in for a moment, going off on a slight tangent, but you do end up to your underwear in mud on Dartmoor by night. Now, one of the main themes in both of your books is that you get very muddy and very messy the whole time. I do think your wife must be very, very long-suffering with your antics.
Oh, she's quietly furious a lot of the time, to be quite honest. I think my USP is starting to be not very good at doing things, to be quite honest. It's kind of like can't canoe, can't walk in darkness. It's kind of like, I suppose it was a little bit of foolhardiness. The Dartmoor thing was, I suppose, a bit of a will-o'-the-wisp. I was just like the bog cotton was just was glowing beautifully in kind of the darkness, kind of really luminescent. And I was just kind of following it without thinking that, you know, bog cotton is called bog cotton for a reason. So yeah, and my sense of direction's terrible as well. So that didn't help things. With the rivers, when I was doing the rivers, it was fine because, you know, on a river you kind of got one of two ways to go. But when you're in darkness on a moor, it's kind of a little bit more tricky.
And talking about putting yourself into the path of fear and danger, you talk about night terrors, and you go on another adventure, which is actually much more revelatory about you, but also about our fear of the night. And you say marsh, mere, bog and swamp are all old words that attest to the restlessness of the landscape, its capacity to shift and change, to swallow and kill. At night we feel the uneasiness of the land and we can't help but fear it. And your most fearful encounter with the night happens in Scotland. Again, my useless USP coming to the fore then. So I was planning to, I was up in Galloway, and the whole idea for that was very much, I suppose it was the first trip where I'd gone somewhere that was really dark and had a reputation for being really dark. And for me, my starting position was not knowing that much about the stars. I always found them quite intimidating in the same way that when I first went into like a bird hide, I actually found the experience quite intimidating. It was just like this, well, I say in the book, this idea of beautiful buckshot, you know, it was kind of like I could appreciate it. It looked gorgeous and had the concept of it, but in terms of kind of navigating my way around it, I found that impossible. So I was trying to learn more about the stars, how we'd navigated with them. And then the big idea was that during that week, I would try and navigate by the stars across part of the Galloway Forest, which is a designated dark sky reserve. But alas, Scotland being Scotland, it was really cloudy, it got really cloudy as I went out. And the thing with clouds is that they're great for kind of reflecting light. So you'll often get those light domes around kind of major conurbations or even little towns, which, you know, the light is just bouncing off the clouds. But in the same way, the clouds act as like a cloche to darkness. And
and basically magnify it. And it got to the point where it was basically like pure darkness. And so much so that there wasn't any animals moving or anything. Even like owls couldn't navigate in it. It was just, I couldn't see the hand in front of my face. It was like being in a cave. And and in that kind of experience, and if you're not ready for it, I think your mind just kind of turns inward. And I just started questioning myself and what the hell I was doing out in a dark forest when I could be somewhere else. So yeah, it was a bit of a existential doubt. And I'm not sure if it was fear of darkness. It was kind of almost that kind of that. It was just that strange feeling when there was nothing to kind of separate from the darkness, kind of like almost like your skin feels porous, and there's that complete merging, which could be a really kind of positive, sublime moment, but at that point just felt quite threatening, I suppose, in terms of threatening to your own identity.
It is a very powerful passage, and it is genuinely threatening, but there's also a bathos to it, because you have an encounter with a cow. Now, before I say this, in the pull of the river, you have encounters with cows as well. It seems to me that cows have been put on Earth in order to disturb Matt Gaw at night.
They're savage beasts.
Are they? Yeah. Tell us about the cow in Galloway.
Well, the cow was on Col, actually, so a bit later on in the book. It might have been a Galloway cow, though, so who knows? But I was just, so I'd gone out for a walk at night. Col is a dark sky community, so there's no street lights at all, and the starlight is just absolutely stunning. It's just like, I couldn't describe it, actually. It's almost like kind of sparks from the muzzle of a gun or something. It's just really bright. The Milky Way is astonishing, being reflected off the sea. And so I was out. I thought I'd get in a sleeping bag and have a little, because the best position to watch the stars is lying down. So I was lying down in this sand dune, and woke up to being savaged by a cow that was trying to eat my sleeping bag. But I think, it's just one of those when you wake up and you kind of think, Christ, it's a bear or something. But no, it's just a cow.
Yeah, but you do have fawn, because in the pull of the river also.
Well, there was a herd of them. Yeah, they meant business.
Goodness me. But interestingly, this bit really interests me, because before some of these explorations of fear, you meet the moon, and then you meet the stars. You make a conscious effort to go to an observatory and learn about the stars, but you confess to a fear almost of the stars themselves. You say, stars, despite their beauty, have always scared me a little. I'm intimidated by their number, confused by their names and changing positions, overwhelmed by their distance from us, knowing that their glimmering light has taken millions, even billions of years to reach us. And then your buckshot line, theirs is a scattered buckshot of light that I can make little sense of. Now that goes to the heart, really, of this idea of bigger things than us being frightening and things we can't explain. I
think that for me is like, look, with all kind of parts of the natural world, there comes that kind of moment, that kind of flash of kind of connectedness, whether you're kind of, like for me, out canoeing or watching birds or watching an animal run or whatever, then sometimes you can just kind of get this kind of glimpse of kind of the interconnectedness of how everything kind of fits and is perfect. And then, which sounds really kind of, but with the stars, it's just so overwhelming, or so kind of, I talk about Douglas Adams in there in one of his books. He has this form of punishment where you go into a machine and it's just the universe, the entire universe, with this small arrow that says you are here, and it just kind of melts your entire brain, because it's just such an othering experience. And I suppose in a way it's kind of it's similar to the kind of Galloway forest, because it's that sense of, it's so hard to kind of keep that concept of you and your life, the smallness of it in comparison to everything that you can see in front of you and how it's connected to everything that has been. But I suppose with the stars, it's kind of, you do have that, although you do get glimpses of that, it can be that sort of beautiful experience, and it's not quite as threatening. But sorry, that's quite a rambling answer. But I suppose also there was that kind of intimidated by just, where do you start? And for me as an adult and someone who was meant to know a few things about the natural world, rightly or wrongly, the idea that I could only kind of really name the Plough and the Orion and things like that just seemed a little bit embarrassing, so I felt a little bit ashamed about it, I suppose, as well. But yeah, like I said before, it felt like, when you kind of first go into a bird hide and you just kind of think, well, I can see a mallard, but everything else I'm pretty clueless about. And it was that kind of thing. And I think if you can't start to navigate it around in some kind of sense, then it can be overwhelming and you can be fearful.
Mm. And for people in past ages who lived without some of the knowledge that we have and some of the technology that we have now, the fear would have been much more real. But then thematically, I want to nudge us onto the idea of nature tamed, which really is a very big theme in the book, the idea of the sky being tamed. But before I do that, I'm noticing we don't yet have any questions. Should people wish to ask Matt questions, there's a Q&A box, and you're welcome to write questions in there. Depending on how many we have, some I might not get to. Some of them I will read simply for expediency. Some I might read to Matt. Some we might draw you into the conversation briefly to ask your question yourself. But if you do have a question for Matt, please do ask him anything about his exploration of the sky, but also if you've read The Pull of the River, which came out last year, started last year, wasn't it?
It all blends into.
Great River.
2016, I think it was. That one.
16. Oh, goodness me.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, then I'm. Yes, but it's been out for a while, so people might have read it. So if you have a question about that, also please do ask. So, with relation to the moon, which obviously is enormously powerful and culturally has been enormously powerful to us for a very long time. You touch first on this idea of taming and in some way taking away the magic. And you say, and then in 1969, humans planted a flag in her. The goddess was disrobed and punctured by a staff-wielding man. I can't help but wonder if Apollo 11, despite all its achievements, is in some way behind our disconnection from the moon. Perhaps part of its myth and magic died under the dusty heels of conquering American moon boots, a leap for mankind that killed a leap of faith. After all, why watch and follow something that is known to be not a shining goddess, but dead rock? Beautiful. Absolutely. Oh. But there is this idea of a lessening, a taming, when we lose myth. I'm sorry.
You froze. Sorry, you froze a little bit there for me. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that there's an idea which goes through the book, and I'll come on to some other things about it later on, that there's this idea of how we have lost the heavenly bodies.
Yeah.
And we have tamed them, but we've also, we'll get onto light and pollution and things a little bit later on. But there's this theme throughout the book of loss, of understanding, of love, of worship.
I think it's, I tried not to be kind of nostalgic in terms of, I don't think we should kind of go back, Ricketts, weren't they great kind of thing. I didn't want it to be like, but at the same point, there was kind of that magic of it does feel like we have lost that magic in a certain sense. And I think, the moon used to be like a really important part of our, of just how we lived and how we organized our life in terms of, you couldn't go out if it was a new moon or, if it was too cloudy or things like that and the moon was blocked out. It was the parish lantern that kept us safe, or if you were the other way around, it was the tatler that kind of told on your crimes. I suppose as well, it was that first idea of eternity and the fact that you had this amazingly bright light that grew and then diminished, disappeared, and then was reborn again. And I think as we've kind of got more modern and we haven't needed to depend on these things for our light or to mark our seasons. It's easier to look at your smartphone than it is to check your the state of the moon to see what time of the month it is or what time of the week it is. But at the same point, I think we have lost something. And I think it's easy to kind of think, but those were kind of times when we didn't have the science and rationality. But I think with a lot of kind of ancient people and even not ancient people, pre-industrial revolution, they kind of having those myths didn't necessarily kind of go against logic or go against reason. They weren't mutually exclusive things. They were just part of the stories of how we are and how we live. And I think they're really important. I think it's just part of the story of being human.
And there's another thing that we've done, which is losing or damaging our connection with the sky, and indeed damaging the sky and damaging life around us. And I'll sort of develop this through several quotations. But you first pick up on this when you visit the observatory in Scotland. And you say, it's hard to avoid the irony. As we advance towards the stars with greater technology and an understanding that reaches far beyond what we can see, we are also in retreat from them. The trappings of modernity have helped to hide them in a sickly soup of man-made light. And that's a very powerful theme in the book.
Yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it? You become more aware of these things. And, even recently, kind of when in lockdown, when we're talking about a lot of people were kind of, they were experiencing the natural world from their garden and a lot of that involved looking up, and that was fantastic. And then you kind of see a lot of videos of the space train and the satellites and all those kind of things. And it's kind of like, okay, look, all these different things that we're putting up there to kind of try and understand more about the world or I suppose in the space train sense, just to kind of communicate with each other, is actually having this huge impact on something that connects us to something so much bigger. And it is frustrating. It's just really, I get really upset about it, but it is really frustrating, that kind of separation. And it's been such a vital part of our culture and our history. To kind of think that something like the Milky Way, which would have just is so part of our culture, whether it's kind of poetry or art or just kind of our everyday parlance, but kind of now 70% of the UK population can't see it. And it was pretty much the first time that I had got a really good view of it was in the Isle of Col. I saw it elsewhere. I think Galloway was amazing, but Col was something else. And that was like a real glimpse of what we would have got in a kind of an early modern kind of society. And I think as well with cities as well, we talk about, it's almost like as humanity's developed, it's kind of that what makes a city is the distance it is from the natural world, and part of that is light. So we kind of almost take humanity's defining characteristic is its removal from the natural world, the thing that really should define it.
And as the book develops, you start with the moon, you move through the stars. There's a narrative arc, and then you suddenly jink in an entirely different direction, and you take us to London and talk about this very thing of the places we live and the light we pour into the sky at who knows what cost environmentally in terms of carbon, but you're not particularly in this case talking about that. You're talking about light pollution.
Yeah.
So on your visit to London, burning bright, a city's illuminations are a proud marker of civilization, an indication that our dependency on nature and the daily and seasonal cycles we associate with the countryside has been ruptured or surpassed. And then a little later on, as you've just said, in fact, the history of light is the history of civilization.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really creative. It's one of the most striking moments of the book when you go away from the night sky. You go away from the stars to explore what it means to be divorced by natural light from the stars and the heavens.
Well, I think as well, even now, if you're talking about kind of connotations of night, you might get someone saying the moon and the stars, but then you'd probably be talking about curtains and light switches, and it's very much kind of battening out the night, in a way that is, I suppose, remarkably similar to kind of that pre-modern age when we thought the night air was noxious, and we thought that, which is where nightfall comes from, the idea of vapors falling with the night sky and trying to keep it out, and just pushing it away. So yeah, it's that kind of exactly that. But I suppose I was really keen to go to London. It started off in the book. I was kind of I wanted to kind of seek out those dark places, and I was thinking as well at one point about that I should be trying to seek out kind of international dark places and looking at that. But I thought it was really important to try and find or capture the idea of night that we experience in this country. But also, I think it's a bit, I don't know, I just felt a bit guilty in terms of the carbon side of things, that idea of a nature writer jetting all over the world and then writing about how terrible, the terrible things that we're doing. It just seems a little bit hypocritical, but yeah.
It does. It is very, very striking that when you take us to London and you show us the night sky or the total absence of it, and therefore we reflect on the absence of a relationship. Now, if I can drag you back to your earlier book, The Pull of the River, is equally lovely. You touch on the same theme again, really, there, of nature tamed. So one of the early rivers on which you and your friend James canoe is in your hometown, or your chosen hometown of Bury St Edmunds. I think I probably lived in Bury St Edmunds for a good year before I even noticed the river, before I realised that the sludge-filled ditch where I went running was the Linnet, a tributary of the Lark. The Lark, the clue is in the name, a place that should sing and burble in flight. One of only 200 chalk streams in the world. It ought to be revered and loved, not subdued with concrete broken by sluices and cruel flood defences. It is a source of shame, or bloody well ought to be. And I think...
I'm such a grumpy so-and-so, aren't I?
No, you're not, because I'm reading these things and going, yes, get in. Somebody's saying the things that I'm thinking. But you see our impact on the heavens and our impact on the earth in the same way, I feel, that you lament the taming of it all and the concreting of it all.
Yeah, I suppose part of it, I think with both books, they felt quite childish in a way, in terms of, well, hopefully not in the way they were written, but in terms of the actual, like, especially with Pull of the River, I had that real sense when I was doing the trips of a world made bigger. In the same way when you go and play in a den or in a field when you're young, your world seems so much bigger, and it just seems like such an amazing place to explore, and the world's your oyster. And I had the same feeling of the river. They felt like these kind of wonderful waterscapes where you were free to explore again. You did have that freedom, and then you kind of were brought up sharp by those by those things, those objects, those concrete kind of spaces, the flood defences, the fact that rivers had been straightened or drained or abused or pumped full of sewage. The Lark, for example, was known as the Jordan of the Fens, because that's where people used to be brought to be baptised. And now it's kind of like, partially buried under a car park. It's just, you have to laugh or you'd cry, really.
Yes, you do in so many things. But there is an almost more painful chapter in Under the Stars, where you reach beyond. You go to London, you see for yourself how our pollution separates us, humans, from the night sky. But then you explore how that light reflects back on the world. Now, this is something I have been an environmentalist as long as I remember. I have read everything I can about wildlife, nature, the environment, and I've never really thought about the impact of halogen lights and light pollution on biodiversity. So you say in that chapter, by chasing away darkness and hiding the cues given by natural light, we have created another imbalance in the natural world that impacts on plants, pollinators, mammals, birds, and eventually us. And that really hit me because it's such a profound thought and such a terrifying one too.
I get, and you were saying it was news to you. It was something that I hadn't really contemplated. I suppose for me, when I started doing the book, it was about kind of understanding. As I said read in the introduction, it was about. It felt like life had been half-lived, and I knew that light pollution would have to come up. It'd be something that I'd have to look at, but I didn't realise that it would be such a big factor, and that the fact that not only was my life only being half-lived, that the conservation story and the conservation narrative was only only half the story of that is being told. And some of the research, the research that I kind of looked at, that obviously I referenced some research by Cley in the Under the Stars, which was looking at how the effects of light just cascades. For example, I think most people would probably understand that they've seen moths going to the windows or into lights, but looking at how it affects every species, the predator-prey disruption at the lowest food, the part of the food chain to being disrupted, the way that bats navigate, the way that deer navigate. It's just, I think not only do we not think about how our light impacts wildlife, but we also are a little bit unaware of just how bright places are. And I think that's one of the things that really struck me, actually, and it was a really simple thing. Travis Longcore, who wrote a fantastic book on kind of the ecology of night, he's doing some research looking at how cougars see the landscape. And what he was doing was taking a photo of a landscape where cougars are kind of known to be, and then changing that photograph in line with the cougar's nocturnal vision capacity. And on the first kind of human level picture, you can kind of see like a few lights twinkling away in the background. You adjust it for a cougar and you suddenly have, it's like daylight. And not only are we kind of creating these networks of lights and stuff that we can kind of see, we're also creating this network of fear for animals that we can't see or don't notice.
And ironic that we're banishing our own fear by lighting up the night, and at the same time creating much more stress and fear and disruption for the species with whom we share the world and whose habitats we have already destroyed, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Terrifying. I'm actually going to do something I don't normally do at this point, which is, before we get on to the final, the denouement, which is the third phase in our relationship, which is really where we are now, where many of us are longing for a deeper and more connected relationship with nature, having tamed the night, the landscape, etc. But I'm going to bring in some questions. Now, first one comes from Sarah Groves, and I'm going to read this one. And Sarah says, "Hello, Nick and Matt. How do you think we can change the collective mind mindset, and you do touch on this in the book. And if you can't remember, I've got the quotation in front of me. And reclaim the night from so much light pollution. Thank you. So how can we reclaim the night from so much light pollution? By changing the collective mindset. Thank you, Sarah, for that question.
I think the first thing to say is that for all of my doom and gloom over the last 2 or 3 minutes, is kind of the point is, as Sarah's saying, that you can reclaim it. It's just, unlike carbon or plastics, it's, you're not going to find light in the belly of whale or in different strata. It's kind of, you turn light off and it disappears, and the impacts of it can disappear. So I think that's one thing. I think it's the same with kind of any environment, addressing any environmental impact. There's kind of things we can do as individuals in terms of monitoring the lights we use, not lighting up outside spaces. There's also putting pressure on councils to use appropriate light sources, because one of the problems is that so I'm going to get really boring and talk about lights now, but in terms of a lot of councils cut lights and how they use them due for budgeting reasons, and then one of the fears is that now LEDs are so cheap they're actually going to put more and more lights out because budgeting is not an issue. So it's making sure that you kind of that we lobby on those kind of behalf, writing to MPs, and I think just having conversations about it, really. It's just about awareness. I think, look at something like CFCs in the 80s. It's just those kind of things. It's getting the awareness, having the conversations, and making sure that it is on the agenda. And there are people doing a lot of good things. I should point out, I'm by no means the first person to kind of have looked at it. So it's I think that the campaign for the CPRE are doing a lot of stuff on it, as are obviously the Dark Sky Association and things like that. So there are people to get behind, but yeah, it's just but start local, I think.
You may not be the first person, but you have brought it all together in a very readable and very accessible and very beautiful whole. Now, you've partly answered this question, but David, can we bring in Mary Graham, who has a question along the same lines? Mary, hello.
Hello, good evening.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Yes, the problem we have here in the village is, although we've got no street lights, it's amazing how many people seem to want to have lights on both the front and the back of the houses. And, it's really ruined the night sky. I've noticed I used to be able to really see the stars well here. Now I have to walk over about 3 fields to get away from the lights. Is there any way that we can encourage people? A lot of people I've spoken to say, well, it's to deter burglars, etc. I think it just lets them see where they can get into the houses better.
Yeah, well, exactly. Actually, there was some research done on that, and which suggested exactly the same thing. You've got a burglar's not going to go into a dark warehouse, but a nice light one where he can see everything. Thank you very much. I think it's about trying to have those conversations, but there is ways of reporting light blights to councils as well, and the Campaign for Protection of Rural England as well have got some information about how to report different light problems. But it can be tricky, can't it? Because I know that there is a lot of concern about light and safety, which is one of the first things that people sort of say when you turn the street lights out, kind of, it'll increase crime. The research has shown that that's not the case. And if crime does happen in terms of break-ins and things like that, then you can always turn a light back on.
So it's really interesting that much of the focus that people have is precisely this issue of the night sky being taken from us by light pollution, and how much it affects us, and as we realise through reading your book, how much it affects the world around us. But there are some beautiful, beautiful, beautiful passages where you have moments of dare I say, transcendence, where you connect with the night sky and your family connects with the night sky. Perhaps the most beautiful passage of all. And then a little bit of typical Matt Gaw self-ironizing and bathos at the end of that passage. But there is a very strong current in nature writing now. I'm thinking of Emma Mitchell, Joe Harkness, Dara McNulty, of healing through nature. And I think you touch on that almost, that there is a joy. Both actually, there's a passage in The Pull of the River where you don't say what month, but it sounds like it's about March or April. And you both strip off and jump in the river and shiver, but it's the most vital and invigorating experience. But you have similar and one utterly gorgeous passage where you go out to try and observe an eclipse, but you end up in a rainstorm. And you say, we laugh as our T-shirts are pasted to our chests and our hair is gummed to our foreheads, opening our mouths wide so the rain might land on our tongues. Iron, fresh, sweet, the sharp coolness after the warmth of day is delicious, deliriously so. We whoop and holler, standing with arms outstretched like lunatics under the sheathed blood moon. There is a regaining of vitality through connection that I think you discover through the book.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, to be honest, most of those incidences have taken place when I've been not on my own. I think, because that's another thing that people sort of say about kind of walking alone, or I don't want to walk alone, or don't want to do this alone. I think for me, a lot of those kind of really vital and amazing experiences weren't when I was kind of wandering lonely as a cloud. It was when I've been with friends, I've been with family, and kind of sharing those moments, I think is amazing. I think with James, kind of that kind of childlike kind of, well, maybe we shouldn't be jumping in, but we did. And that was just cleansing, and there was just a shedding of kind of all of the responsibilities and worries. And with my family as well, when we went to see the stars, it was just, I suppose, one of the things I really struggled with before, and looking at the stars and when I was in the forest crying, was I suppose not being grounded. I'd felt like I'd lost myself to the darkness or whatever, but with them they just kind of brought this kind of anchor, and seeing them enjoy it and experience it with them was really special. And hopefully they'll look back on it and they'll no longer say, Dad, you take us on such boring holidays.
It is the most, to bring you back to it, because there's a little bit you haven't explained. It's not just stars that they see, is it? It's a magical experience with the Orionids.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was incredible. It was incredible. But they were still moaning. That's just kids. So when I take them out in the canoe, they moan about it as well. So it's just one of those things. But yeah, I think I've been really lucky, and I think a lot of the time is kind of when you have those kind of magical experiences, those kind of experiences where everything just connects up for that flash, that synapse kind of burst of belonging. They're often with other people as well. They're shared experiences, and that's what makes them so magical.
And for me, it's the most beautiful passage in a very, very beautiful book. Now I'm going to go off on a tangent, having reclaimed our relationship with nature, and we'll come to some more questions in just a moment, but a tangent from me for a moment, because it strikes me as really interesting. Do you know an author called Nick Hayes, and have you read his book of Trespass?
I've got it on my to-be read pile, because I from what I've seen of it, it's so up your street, it's not true. It's an utterly glorious book. I've recently just signed a letter that he's putting together in terms of kind of trying to get more rights of access. And it's a great... I was writing Pull of the River, and I was writing the bits on...
Roger Deakin and...
Yeah, and disputing access and all of those kind of things. The bits that my wife now calls the boring access chapter.
It's not boring at all.
No, of course it's not. But I was kind of thinking there is definitely a book in this. So I'm a little bit gutted that he's got around to writing it. And from what I've seen, he's written it beautifully as well.
It is beautiful, witty, very iconoclastic, extremely well researched. But there is also a chapter about exploring rivers and consciously going where he didn't ought to. But one of the reasons I mentioned Roger Deakin and the Waveney is because Nick Hayes is a friend of the family friends of Roger Deakin's who now live in Roger Deakin's home in Suffolk. And so there are all kinds of circles there that come.
I didn't realise he was friend. Okay, that's...
Yes. So he stays regularly. And indeed, there are parts of the book, I'm pointing to it, the book isn't there, it's upstairs. There are parts where he is in Roger's house when he's writing. I think it would nourish your soul. It's an absolutely...
I went quite recently around to... I was doing some tree planting in Mellis and got invited by Roger's family to go along, and so I got to go into his farmhouse, and I was just like a completely I've never been starstruck by a house before, but I was just it was just incredible.
It is. I have mourned that man's death so many times whenever I read another of his books, or the one that's just come out by his son and family friends about how he restored the house. And he was an extraordinary thinker. And you, particularly in The Pull of the River, you honour him greatly. He lives through so many writers writing.
I know he is. It's kind of like there's a bit of Deakin kind of trickling everywhere.
There should be, because he was quite an extraordinary character. Now, on that very subject, I'm going to read this question from David Stoddard. How do you become a nature writer?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's one that I've been trying to ask.
You have already managed
a long time. Well, for me, my passage or my journey was through journalism. I was a journalist for 10 or 11 years, and then started writing kind of more things about the natural world, and I was lucky, I suppose, in a way. I did a piece for the Eliot and Thompson's seasonal anthology, which was edited by Melissa Harrison.
Who is, I must butt in, who is our guest in February.
And she is gorgeous. You've got to come and see her. It's the law. And so, and then they asked if I was doing anything else, and I was just like, well, I'm writing a book about canoeing. And then they said, oh, can we see it? So then I desperately got out in a canoe and started writing it. But so, yeah, I was lucky in that. But I think really it's just nature writing is just to keep writing. And when I do kind of creative writing workshops, it's all about just exercising that writing muscle, trying to, going back to Roger Deakin. Like for me, like probably my favourite book of his is Notes from Walnut Tree Farm. Is that kind of, and he described himself not as a writer but a jotter, and I think jot, scribble, and write as much as you can. Read voraciously, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, scientific journals, magazines. Write again, rip it up, start again. And I think there was a really nice piece of advice by Rob McFarlane, who the doyen of our breed, our ilk, and he said that either go somewhere until you know it like the back of your hand, or go somewhere until it's fabulously alien. And just keep sharing it and submitting it places. I think there are some great places that will accept. And I think, in terms of publishers, there's a lot of, at the moment, it's the bubble hasn't yet burst on nature writing. So good luck.
Our wonderful friend Patrick Barkham. Do you know Patrick in person?
I met Patrick at the tree planting.
Patrick is a huge friend and supporter of Norfolk Wildlife Trust, and he has been our guest at all sorts of events, including a couple that I've done this year, talking about wild child. But he once said at something I was listening to, he said that too many good books are ruined by the idea that they have, or don't get finished because people think they have to be perfect. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. You just have to press on and produce something.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an endurance kind of. You do it through passion and well, I'm not going to try and improve on Patrick's words because he's a good guy and he knows his onions.
It does indeed. I would say that you do too. You're certainly right, with a delicacy and a wit that are quite beautiful. Now, back to practicalities. I'm going to read this one as well. Kate Duggan has a question for you. In the Norfolk coast area of outstanding natural beauty, we are working with a range of organisations to celebrate our stunning dark skies and nightscapes and raise awareness of the issues of light pollution, in particular its impact on biodiversity, which is only now being understood. Your book seems to convey beautifully the wonder of the dark and the importance of how by connecting with the dark, it brings us so much closer to our natural environment. So it's actually plaudit for your book rather than specifically a question.
Well, and amazing that you're doing such great work. And I think it's through projects like that, that kind of the celebration and that raising awareness of the importance of kind of the nightscape and the starscape, that will then help it spread out in the same way that kind of for Norfolk Wildlife Trust and the wildlife trusts around the country, kind of the reserves are these hubs where you then want wildness to kind of spill out from. Hopefully it can be the same for the dark skies, eventually. The dark is rising.
You are the Darth Vader of nature. You're bringing the dark side to us.
Yeah, exactly. Long live the dark side. It's much more fun.
Now, we have a very, very touching question from Carol Wilkinson. David, are we able to bring... I keep mentioning David. David is our wonderful events person and education person at our Cley Marshes Nature Reserve. And David is behind the scenes making all these things happen. David, can you bring in Carol Wilkinson, please? There we go. Carol, good evening. You have a very, very touching and powerful question. Over to you.
Oh, good evening. Good evening.
Hi, Carol.
I'm delighted to be with you. It's about interconnectedness and connectedness, and particularly with regard to the moon. My husband and I moved to Norfolk in 2005 because we loved the night skies here and felt close to nature. And last year, he was suddenly taken ill, went into hospital, and I visited him each day. And on the day I received a phone call, just 5 days later, I left my house and there was a full moon setting in the sky as I left home. And there was something like a sign there. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
Oh, what a touching thing. I think there is definitely a power about the moon, in terms of there's something about the light of it, the stillness of it, and also the kind of the birth and the death of it. I kind of wouldn't have described myself as kind of, I don't know, I probably wouldn't have said that I was particularly spiritual before I kind of did this book, to be honest. But I know that when I saw the moon rise for probably one of the first, shame on me, one of the first times that I can remember, there's something incredibly special about it. And I think it's like there's those kind of moments that you notice things as well. And they take on that significance because it's just that I don't know whether it's transference or what, but there is some kind of, there's definitely something about the moon, and I've noticed it a lot more, and I probably have noticed it, whether it is because I've been out at particular times, but I know that we've had family kind of incidents, and I've kind of been driving following it, and I suppose I've had similar kind of thoughts. But our condolences to you, though, and I hope you take some comfort from the moon as much as you can, because it is, and those connections.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you also very much to Carol for her question. Now, a final question I'm going to read to you from Hilary Williams. What advice do you give to women who would like to enjoy nature by night alone?
I think for me, I'm very kind of aware that as a male, white male, writing I'm writing from a position of privilege, and but it is different for a bloke kind of possibly kind of wandering off by himself. Although my wife didn't think so, she was quite cross about some of that. But I think just be careful. I think to be honest, it is safe. And a lot of the places where I kind of went, where you kind of go to the wild places, you're quite unlikely to come across anyone. But then saying that, do you need to be alone? That's one of the questions that I would ask. And we're talking about earlier on about how some of the greatest experiences that, we've had are with friends and family. And when I went to London, for example, I was going to do that alone. But I ended up going with Sean, who was actually on the beach with at Cove Hythe. And that was through safety, just because I wasn't quite sure where I was going to end up. My sense of direction is awful, so I could have ended up anywhere at any hour. So be careful, but also have a phone on you. Make sure people know where you're going. Just be sensible, I think, is at the end of it. But I would kind of, I think it's safe. But again, I know that I'm coming from a position of privilege saying that, but I would just be careful, be sensible.
I'm going to take you back, Matt, to that idea of the moon we were talking about specifically, but immersion in nature. And you're saying you're not spiritual, but I think whatever spiritual means, people who live a life attempting to open people's eyes to the beauty of nature, and also trying to help people see that we need to protect nature, whether it be the stars or it be the beetle scrabbling through the undergrowth. I think inherently there is thou nature be my guide. There's a spirituality about a relationship with nature, because it is something that fills us up. And this is from your other book, From the Pull of the River. Part of what I find amazing about experiencing nature are those moments of wild chaos, the pure clamor of life when nature and self are suddenly wrapped up together in one song. The boundlessness of the natural world doesn't just surround me or impress me, it assimilates me, claims me as its own. The experience is often fleeting, but it is undeniably precious, soul-nourishingly so. Really beautiful.
Oh, bless. Well, yeah, I think, and that for me probably does sum everything up. I was probably being a bit glib when I was saying I didn't think I was probably being glib or just plain wrong when I said I didn't think I was spiritual. I think you can't help feel something and it feel other, or recognize your own otherness with some of those things. And I think that particular passage was when we were crossing a bit of rough water with a bit of probably a bit foolhardy, to be honest. But it was that
sounds for foolhardy in the book. It sounds extremely scary.
well, yeah, it was. I think that was in the store, the estuary of the store, and it was kind of one of those moments where we just kind of thought, I thought that James was having a great time, but where you kind of take certain things for granted. And it was that idea of, with some of the journeys and the voyages and the explorations, kind of had that kind of idea of expedition and conquering. And we'd kind of got carried away with that idea. And, nature doesn't care about us. It's kind of indifferent. And I suppose that we had the same kind of thing at night. This indifference of night. You're into this different world that doesn't care about you. And that is those kind of moments when you get that feeling that you start to kind of notice everything else and kind of how it connects to you. I think that's probably not a very kind of succinct or makes much sense. Sorry.
Well, I think it makes sense. I'm going to finish. I've luckily managed to find it because I hadn't copied this out, but I just think this is delicious. This is what I mean by Matt Gaw's self-ironizing. So you talk about going across the store with your friend James, and you're terrified, and he seems very relaxed about the whole thing. And you ask him, was he not scared? And he says, I did have a slight concern that the pipe might just split in two. She's homemade, so there's always a worry. He eats his last bit of bread and lies back contentedly, putting his head on a rucksack and his feet on the central seat of the canoe. I stare at him, the horror of his words slowly sinking in. Did you worry about that before or after the selfie? Just so wonderfully witty and self-mocking, which is a deliciously British characteristic.
No, he's just so laid, but he's so kind of gung ho and just so can do. It was so refreshing to be with someone like that for those kind of journeys, and just someone who's kind of capable. And you ask him something and the answer is always yes. Like he's determined that we're going across the channel. That's the next mission. He
might need a stronger canoe.
Yeah. One that's not made in his back garden, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kept Matt talking we've all kept Matt talking for more than an hour now, so it's probably time we started to wrap up. I wish, again, to shamelessly, but I can do it on his behalf, to plug his two beautiful books, The Pull of the River and Under the Stars. They are both lyrical, funny, charming, and thought-provoking, both of them in equal measure. And you can buy them through the link that has been given to you in the chat attached to this Zoom conversation, but also in the emails that you've received about this event. So by clicking on that, you go to Wild Sounds and Books, who are our great, great friends who stock all of the books in our visitor centres and very generously are making a 10% donation and a slight discount for sales attached to this event, a 10% donation to Norfolk Wildlife Trust to help our work protecting wildlife and wild places right across the county. Please do let us know if you've enjoyed this evening or if there's anything about it that we might do differently. We are extremely keen to hear from you. And again, there will be a link telling you how to give us your feedback. Matt, we are extremely grateful to you. Thank you very much. Thank you to your family for letting you be with us this evening. Thank you for your beautiful books and for sharing them with us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
A real pleasure. And to everybody who's listening this evening, we look forward to joining you again next year with Chris Packham and Megan McCubbin starting off, the wonderful Melissa Harrison joining us in February. But until then, whatever holidays you celebrate, happy Christmas to you, happy New Year, happy Hanukkah, happy winter solstice. We look forward to peaceful times, prosperous times, joyous times in which we can all hug one another in the new year. A very happy 2021 to you all. Thank you and good night.